So now we're looking at the Quran. We come now to the Quran itself. In its value, does it produce itself as a consistent, reliable book? It seems evident that the Quran underwent a transformation during the 100 years following the Prophet's death. We have now uncovered coins with supposed Quranic writings on them, which date from 685 AD, coined during the reign of al-Malik. Nevo wrote this, the author, in 1994 in his book. Furthermore, the Dome of the Rock sanctuary built by al-Malik in Jerusalem in 691 AD, quote, does attest to the existence at the end of the 7th century of materials immediately recognizable as Koranic. Different spelling, but same pronunciation. Yet the quotations from the Quran on both the coins and the Dome of the Rock differ in details from that which we find in the Quran today. Berchem and Grohmann, two etymologists who have done extensive research on the Dome of the Rock inscriptions, maintain that the inscriptions contain variant verbal forms, extensive deviances, as well as omissions from the text which we have today. You have these references here, you can take a look. Lots of references if you want to do your own homework. This is an excellent paper, by the way. If these inscriptions had been derived from the Quran, with the variants which they contain, then how could the Quran have been canonized prior to this time, late 7th century? One can only conclude that there must have been an evolution in the transmission of the Quran throughout the years, if indeed they were originally taken from the Quran. Doesn't speak well for a consistent book that people say there's only one, and it's in Saudi Arabia. The sources also seem to suggest that the Quran was put together rather hurriedly. This is underlined by John Wansbrough, who maintains that the book is strikingly lacking in overall structure, frequently obscure and inconsequential in both language and content, perfunctory in its linking of disparate materials, and given to the repetition of whole passages in variant versions. On this basis, it can be plausibly argued that the book is the product of the belated and imperfect editing of materials from a plurality of traditions. This is quoted in Hagerism, Crone-Cook in 1977. Thus, Crone and Cook believe that because of the imperfection of the editing, the emergence of the Quran must have been a sudden and late event. So, as to when that event took place, we are not altogether sure. But we can make an educated guess. From the earlier discussion concerning the dating of the earliest manuscripts, we can conclude that there was no Quranic documentation in existence in the mid-late 7th century. The earliest reference from outside Islamic literary traditions to the book called the Quran occurs in the mid-8th century between an Arab and a monk of Bet Hal, but no one knows whether it may have differed considerably in content from the Quran which we have today. Both Crone and Cook conclude that except for this small reference, there is no indication of the existence of the Quran before the end of the 7th century. Crone and Cook in their research go on to maintain that it was under the governor Hajjaj of Iraq in 705 AD that we have a logical historical context in which the Quran, or a nascent body of literature, one that's existing at that time but doesn't now, which would later become the Quran, and could have been compiled as Muhammad's scripture. In an account attributed by Leo by Lavande, the governor Hajjaj is shown to have collected all the old Haggarine writings and replaced them with others according to his own taste, and disseminated them everywhere among his nation. A reasonable conclusion is that it was during this period that the Quran began its evolution. Remember, evolution. The Bible was written once. The books were written, the 66 books were written at different times, but only once, possibly beginning to be written down until it was finally canonized in the mid to late 8th century as the Quran which we now have. From this brief survey, we can conclude that the archaeological evidence for the historicity of the Quran proves to be the most damaging. Not only do the 7th and 8th century ruins and inscriptions from the area seem to contradict the notion that Muhammad canonized the direction of prayer during his lifetime, or that he had formulated a scripture known as the Quran, but the idea of his universal prophethood and that he was the final seal of all the prophets is brought into question. This indeed is significant and troublesome. The question we must now pose is whether there is any archaeological evidence to corroborate the authenticity for the Bible. Do the same problems exist with the Bible that we find with the Quran? So we've looked at the Quran, paucity of evidence, hardly anything that's even consistent. Let's take a look to see what we have about the Bible. What do you think? Go to the bottom of the page and click on that study. See what it is. Quran number 7. Okay. This guy is a really, really good writer on this issue. So let's open up Quran number 7 and see what archaeological evidence we have for the Bible. Here we go. The Bible's archaeological evidence. We read the paucity of our evidence, archaeologically speaking, of the Quran. What does the Bible have to offer? What has become evident over the last few decades is that unlike the difficulties found with the Quranic evidence, the most fruitful area for a confirmation of the Bible's reliability has come from the field of archaeology. For it is here that the past can speak to us the clearest concerning what happened then. Because Abraham is honored by both Christianity and Islam, but I must add, they have a different slant on it than the Quran versus the Bible, it is interesting to look at the archaeological evidence concerning his time, which is now coming to light in the 20th century. What we find is that archaeology clearly places Abraham in Palestine and not in Arabia. There's the different slant to begin with. Abraham's name appears in Babylonia as a personal name at the very period of the patriarchs, though the critics believed he was a fictitious character who was redacted back by the later Israelites. Now we know differently because we have looked at all these copies of the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, and there's hardly any differences. 99.5% corroboration. Amazing. The field of Abram and Hebron is mentioned in 918 BC by the pharaoh Shishak of Egypt, now also believed to be Ramses II. He had just finished warring in Palestine and inscribed on the walls of his temple at Karnak the name of the great patriarch, proving that even at this early date Abraham was known not in Arabia, as Muslims contend, but in Palestine, the land the Bible places him. The Beni Hassan tomb from the Abrahamic period depicts Asiatics coming to Egypt during a famine, corresponding with the biblical account of the plight of the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There is further archaeological evidence. Let me just spell that, I-C-A-L. There's further archaeological evidence which supports other biblical accounts, such as the doors of Sodom, Tel Beit Mirsim, dated to between 2200 to 1600 BC, are heavy doors needed for security, the same doors which we find in Genesis 19:9. Yet, if this account had been written between 900 to 600 BC, as the critics previously claimed, we would have read about arches and curtains, because security was no longer such a concern then. 5. Joseph's price as a slave was 20 shekels, Genesis 37:28, which, according to trade tablets from that period is the correct price for 1700 BC. An earlier account would have been cheaper, while a later account would have been more expensive. 6. Joseph's tomb, Joshua 24:32, as possibly found in Shechem, as in the find. Hang on. So to begin, again at 5, Joseph's price as a slave was 20 shekels, Genesis 37:28, which, according to trade tablets from that period, is the correct price for 1700 BC. An earlier account would have been cheaper, while the later account would have been more expensive. 6. Joseph's tomb, Joshua 24:32, has possibly been found in Shechem, as in the find there is a mummy, and next to the mummy sits an Egyptian official's sword. Is this mere coincidence? Was not Joseph in authority there, second to Pharaoh? Jericho's excavation in number 7, showed that the walls fell outwards, echoing Joshua 6:20, enabling the attackers to climb over and into the town. Yet according to the laws of physics, walls of towns always fell inwards. A later redactor would certainly have not made such an obvious mistake unless he was an eyewitness, as Joshua was. Point 8. David's capture of Jerusalem, recounted in 2 Samuel 5, 6-8, and 1 Chronicles 11:6, speak of Joab using water shafts built by the Jebusites to surprise them and defeat them. Historians had assumed that these were simply legendary until archaeological excavation by R.A.S. McAllister, J.G. Duncan, and Kathleen Kenyon on Ophel now have found these very water shafts. Another new and exciting archaeological research is that which has been carried out by the British Egyptologist David Rohl. Until a few years ago, we only had archaeological evidence for the patriarchal, Davidic, and New Testament periods, but little to none for the Mosaic period. Yet one would expect much data on this period due to the cataclysmic events which occurred during that time. David Rohl, in his book Attest of Time, has given us a possible reason why, and it is rather simple. It seems that we have simply been off in our dates by almost 300 years. That'll do it. By redating the pharaonic lists in Egypt, he has been able to now identify the abandoned city of the Israelite slaves called Avaris, the death pits from the 10th plague, and Joseph's original tomb and home. There remains many tells yet to uncover. Thousands and thousands of years, and people write books, and they don't want to change anything because they sell the book. If something changes, then their book is outdated. Moving into the New Testament material, we have depended on archaeology once again to corroborate a number of facts which the critics consider to be at best dubious and at worst in error. Point 9. Paul's reference to Erastus as the treasurer of Corinth, Romans 16:23, was thought to be erroneous, but now has been confirmed by a pavement found in 1929 bearing his name. It is to Luke, however, that the skeptics have reserved their harshest criticisms, because he, more than any other of the first century writers, spoke about specific peoples and places. Yet surprisingly, once the dust had settled on new inscription findings, it is Luke who has confounded these same critics time and again. For instance, in point 10, Luke's use of the word Meris to maintain that Philippi was a district of Macedonia was doubted until the inscriptions were found, which was this very word uses this very word to describe divisions of a district. Point 11, Luke's mention of Quirinius as the governor of Syria during the birth of Jesus has now been proven accurate by an inscription from Antioch. Point 12, Luke's usage of politarchs, to denote the civil authority of Thessalonica, Acts 17:6, was questioned until some 19 inscriptions have been found that make use of this title, 5 of which are in reference to Thessalonica.